This lecture will teach you how to critically read academic text for your literature review chapter. Critical analysis is directly linked to your ability to read critically. This session will cover 5 questions to critique the academic text in front of you. So imagine you have a text in front of you. It could be a journal article in front of you or a textbook in front of you, whatever. Here are 5 critical questions to ask. Number 1, is this text too general? Number 2, the text states that something has changed, but has anything really changed? Number 3, is this text outdated? Number 4, does this text mention anything about race, gender, or class? Number 5, does this text mention its limitations? Question 1, is the text too general? You can critique a text because it is too general. If you see a journal article or a book that takes a broad approach, you can critique it. For example, if your dissertation topic is focused on the UK, you can critique a text that looks at the whole of Europe. If your dissertation topic is focused on older people, you can critique a text that looks at the whole population. If your dissertation topic is focused on the 1990s, you can critique a text that looks at the whole 20th century. Here are some examples of this approach. Smith's study is too generic to contribute to this discussion. His study is too generic, too wide, too extensive, too vast to contribute to our focused investigation. Although there is some value in Smith's study, his coverage is too broad to inform this dissertation. Here we acknowledge that there is some value in Smith's study. There is always something we can take. There is always something we can use. Some small parts may be useful, but as a whole, it is not beneficial to our focused dissertation. To be critical is to be selective. I'll take this, but I'll leave that part. I'll take this, but I need to adapt to this part. This is being critical. Also, when you critique Smith's study for being too general, you are showing the significance of your own focused dissertation. Your dissertation rises in value because your dissertation is doing what Smith's study is not doing. Your dissertation is focused. His study is unfocused. Your dissertation is concentrated. His study is generic. His study is diluted. We can expand his critique by mentioning the disadvantages of being so general. You are essentially listing the reasons why the article in front of you is erroneous. It is erroneous because it neglects specific context. It is erroneous because it is too generic. Here are some examples. Alternatively, you can group general studies together. So in this example, there are several studies that take a very broad international approach. You have identified some general or broad studies and grouped them together in this category. When you group studies together, it shows ownership and it shows that you are able to have an overview of the literature. Also, show the citations. This is evidence for your grouping studies together. Each study is separated by a semicolon. This is a good demonstration of critical thinking. Here is another example. There are a number of studies that focus on the entire industry. In contrast, some scholars have taken a different approach by focusing on specific sectors. You are showing the contrast in this example. You have demarcated 2 strands of the literature. You identify that one strand has a focus on the entire industry and the other strand has a focus on specific sectors within that industry. A wide focus versus a narrow focus. Why not expand this critique? Which one is better, narrow or wide? You can adopt this technique more broadly. Try to create categories for the books and articles that you have read. For example, it is possible to divide the literature into 3 strands: practitioner-focused, client-focused, and industry-centric. These categories were titled by the student. As the student was reading the literature, they realized that some studies mostly focused on a particular aspect, not completely focused, but mostly focused. So the student categorized practitioner-focused studies, they categorized client-focused studies, and they categorized industry-centric studies. Then they went on to write a whole paragraph that summarized the practitioner-focused studies, which was followed by a paragraph that summarized client-focused studies, which was followed by a paragraph that summarized industry-centric studies. Then they wrote a 4th paragraph that evaluated which was the most useful approach to their dissertation: practitioner, client, or industry. As you start to read more articles and more books, why not create a rough table in your notepad? Separate what you have read into categories. Question 2. The text states that something has changed, but has anything really changed? Has there been any real change? When issues are presented as new, you can argue that not much has changed. You will find in the literature that matters may be presented as modern. There is a new threat, a new moral panic. There's been a paradigm shift. This is a new model. This is a new genre. This is a new perspective. This is a new epistemology. These are scary new times. This is unprecedented. This is a new trend. This is a new sensation. You will see this constant stream of something new being put forward. Essentially, you critique this argument by saying calm down and carry on. Not much has changed. We have seen this before. Matters rarely change overnight. Change is often part of a long process, or we find that we have reinvented the wheel. Or do we even need this new thing? Don't we have existing approaches to deal with this problem? Calm down and carry on. I'll play this very short clip from Channel 4 with Akala, with the now retired Jon Snow. Their discussion epitomizes this critique. Akala is essentially saying, calm down and carry on. We have seen this before.
A lot of the research I did, when you look at scholars like Andrew Davies, who writes books about the history of gang crime in Glasgow and Manchester, or Robert McKilwee, who's got volumes of stuff about the history of gang crime in Liverpool, what you see firstly is that this is not a new problem. Every generation pretends gang crime is a new problem. So when you look at the press reports they cite in their scholarship, it's this same sort of sense of moral panic, this unprecedented thing. When actually we've had violent teenage youth gangs for 150, 200 years, maybe even longer. And the social indicators of that violence have remained identical for almost 200 years, as have the sort of facile explanations of violence.
And those social indicators are?
Poverty, domestic abuse, lack of education, so expulsion from school.
Here are some examples. The third question, is the text outdated? Check the publication date of the book or article. If it was published before a major event took place, you can critique it. For example, a journal article on the extension of parental rights was published in 2019. However, a major law was enacted in 2021. This law was impactful. This law changed the landscape. Now we are looking at this 2019 journal article in 2023. This article is only partially relevant because it was published before the major law came into force. This 2019 article does not discuss the impact of the major law because it was published before the law was enacted. So we can now critique this article because it is outdated. Here are some examples. There are two benefits of looking at the date of publication. First, this will help your rationale. You can distinguish your dissertation by stating that your dissertation is a much needed update. This example states, several monumental events have occurred since Johnson wrote about intersectionality. This gives your work more significance. Second, this will show that you are aware of the context. You haven't just picked the article randomly. You are aware of the context. Johnson's 2018 article was published in a period when you understand what came before the article was written, what was happening during the time the article was written, and what happened after the article was published. In summary, think about the universe around your journal article. Everything is connected. Articles reacting to other articles. Articles reacting to events. Articles building on older theories. Articles standing on the shoulders of other articles. Nobody writes in a vacuum. Question 4. Does the text mention race, gender, or class? You can critique a study if it neglects or only barely mentions race, gender, or class. There are seldom issues in which race, gender, and class is not a significant factor. You can also add to the list age, disability, neurodiversity. Here are some examples. The last question. Are there any limitations? Does the text in front of you state its limitations? Limitations are shortcomings, flaws, problems. Most research-based journal articles state their limitations. When you find these limitations in the article, you can use it against the author. You can turn their limitations into your criticisms. By stating their limitations, they have made our job easier. They have given us the critique. They handed us the keys. Scholars mention their limitations because it is part of research culture. You will do the same in your dissertation. By giving us the limitations, they have made their study transparent. From this, we can make a judgment of whether this is a good study or a bad study. It also gives us opportunities to fill the gap that was left by the author. We have the opportunity to address those limitations in our own dissertation. This is an example of a limitation mentioned by an author. We are reading Mark Simon's paper and we find this passage. Mark Simon states, a limitation of my research is that I have not detailed the complex web of relationships. Great. He has given us a critique. We didn't have to invent one or find one. He just gave it to us. So we turn Simon's confession into our critique. Simon's study fails to detail the complexities of relationships in decision-making contexts. Or Simon offers a simplistic account of the complex web of relationship. These sentences are just examples. You need to go more in depth. You need to explain why offering a simplistic account is problematic. You can explain the importance of detailed explanations. Forming a critique from authors' limitations is not unethical because sometimes the limitations are hard to find. We need the authors to come forward and be transparent so that we can assess their confession. It is essentially our judgment versus their judgment. Some authors believe that their limitations do not impact the findings of their study. They believe that their study is still valid. Their study is still relevant. However, we need to judge if this is true. Maybe we can't get past the limitations. Maybe we think that their limitations are not acceptable. Maybe we think that their limitations cannot be swept under the rug. Also, sometimes individuals may state their limitations to preempt any future critique. By coming clean in their study is a way to neutralize any possible criticism, so we must engage with their limitations. Here are some examples. Generally, you'll find the limitations at the end of the article, and also, some journal articles have a dedicated limitations section. Thank you for listening. All the best with your dissertation.